All right, let's get into it. Have you ever really stopped to think about the stuff you see on your screen every day? Every single icon you tap, every button you click, it all has a story. And it's not what you'd expect. We tend to think this whole digital world was just poof, built from scratch, right? Pure code. But the truth is way more interesting. The design of your phone has this secret history, one that actually connects it all the way back to ancient Greece. And the whole thing starts with an icon that millions of us use without even thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm talking about this one. Why does this specific icon?
The one we all know, the universal symbol for save.
Why on earth does it represent an object that, and let's be real here, most of us have probably never even held in our hands? I mean, especially if you're under 30. The answer is this really cool kind of nerdy design idea called skeuomorphism.
So what is skeuomorphism? Well, it's basically a fancy word for a simple idea. Making new, strange things feel familiar by designing them to look like old, familiar things. Think of it as like a friendly handshake between our old analog world and the new digital one. But here's the real kicker, the part that's going to blow your mind. This whole concept, it has absolutely nothing to do with computers, originally.
Yeah, to really get where our screens come from, we have to travel way, way back in time. And I'm not talking about the 80s. Nope, we're going back thousands of years. I'm not kidding. This is literally an age-old human habit. For example, look at ancient Greek temples. Okay, so when they started building with stone instead of wood, they kept carving these little details into the stone columns, details that were meant to look like the ends of the old wooden beams and pegs. They didn't do anything, structurally speaking. They were just there. Why? To make the new, fancy stone temples feel familiar and comfortable, just like the old wooden ones.
And this timeline, this really puts the scale of it all into perspective. It's wild. You start around 600 BC with those Greek temples we just talked about. Then, jump forward a bit, you've got early pottery where they'd put fake rivets on clay pots just so they'd look like the metal ones they were replacing. And then, bam! You leap thousands of years into the future to 1984. The Apple Macintosh comes out. And what does it have? A desktop, folders, a trash can. It is the exact same idea, thousands of years later. Make the strange new thing feel totally normal.
So this ancient principle became the foundation for what you could call the digital golden age of skeuomorphism. This was the era where our screens were trying their absolute hardest to look and feel just like the real world. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just for looks. It wasn't just decoration. It was what designers call a cognitive bridge. For a whole generation of people who were seeing a computer for the first time, this was everything. The digital world was this abstract, kind of scary place. But a folder, a calculator, a trash can? Hey, we know what those are. We know what to do with them.
And this is exactly why it worked so well. First off, it totally slashed the learning curve. You didn't need a manual. It also built up people's confidence, right? The whole system felt predictable and under control. And honestly, it just brought a little bit of warmth, a little humanity to this otherwise cold, sterile screen. These visual cues, designers call them affordances, they basically screamed at you what to do. You just knew.
And nobody went harder on this than Apple in the early days of iOS. Remember this? Under Scott Forstall, their design chief, the Notes app looked exactly like a yellow legal pad. The Calendar app had fake stitched leather. And your iBooks, they were sitting on an actual virtual wooden bookshelf. It was the absolute pinnacle of digital realism. But you know what they say about peaks? They're usually followed by a pretty steep drop. Because as we all got more comfortable with technology, the very thing that made skeuomorphism so helpful, well, it started to become a real problem. The seeds of a full-blown revolution were being planted.
So what went wrong? Why did the tide turn so fast? Well, for one, what used to feel charming and familiar started to look, well, kind of dated and tacky. All that fake leather and wood grain, it was just visual clutter, and it took up way too much space on our shiny new phone screens. People started asking, wait, why is my calendar pretending to be bound in leather? This is a phone. It felt fake. And then, of course, you have what we started with, the floppy disk problem, where the real-world objects the icons were based on, nobody used them anymore.
Basically, the digital world grew up, and we, the users, grew up with it. That friendly handshake we needed at the beginning, it started to feel more like a condescending pat on the head. A change wasn't just coming, it was inevitable. And that change had a name, flat design. And this comparison here just lays it all out perfectly. Skeuomorphism was all about copying the real world. Textures, shadows, the whole deal. Flat design,
It threw all of that out the window. It was all about solid colors, sharp edges, and a super clean, simple look. The focus shifted completely from what's familiar to what's useful. If you ever saw the difference between iOS 6 and iOS 7, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was like night and day.
And the year it all came to a head was 2013. That's when Apple, the company that basically perfected skeuomorphism, released iOS 7. It was this huge public statement, basically them saying, yeah, that old way of doing things, it's over. The flat design revolution had won. Or had it?
Because here's the last and maybe the most interesting twist in this whole story. Skeuomorphism? It never really died. It just got smarter. It went undercover. It evolved. And honestly, you see its modern disguises everywhere, even if you don't notice them. Think about Google's material design. It uses these really subtle drop shadows to show depth, to tell you, hey, you can tap this. That's a skeuomorphic idea. Or when you're typing and you feel that little buzz, that click, that's haptic feedback, and it's designed to mimic the feeling of a real physical button. And don't even get me started on VR and gaming, where making the digital world feel real is, well, it's the entire point. So I think the big lesson here is that skeuomorphism isn't inherently good or bad. It's not a trend you just follow or reject. It's a tool. And just like any tool in a toolbox, its real value comes from knowing when and how to use it. Which of course brings us to what's next. If all of this design stuff is a constant back and forth between the real and the digital, where do we go from here? Well, the key thing to remember is that the future probably isn't about picking a side. You know, it's not some epic war between flat design and realism. It's about finding the perfect balance. It's about focusing on what actually works for people, what's simple, what's efficient, and what makes technology accessible for absolutely everyone. And that leaves us with one last pretty fascinating question to chew on. As our digital world gets even crazier, with AI, with virtual reality, as it all becomes way more complex and immersive, are we going to need that old friendly handshake again? As we step into these brand new, unreal worlds, are we going to need skeuomorphism to make them feel real, just so we can wrap our heads around them? It's definitely something to think about the next time you go to save a file and click on that little floppy disk.